The carriage rolled quietly beneath the sunlit sky as golden rays filtered through the thick canopy of trees above. Dancing shadows stretched across the path while the old wooden wheels creaked softly with every turn. The peaceful forest shimmered under the warm morning light, almost dreamlike as the carriage continued its journey toward the imperial palace. Inside, anticipation quietly filled the air. Ebi pressed herself against the carriage window, her eyes widening in amazement at the sight of the massive imperial palace in the distance. She exclaimed that it was far more beautiful than anything she had ever seen in books. Her innocent reaction quickly caught the attention of several passengers nearby. Some mocked her openly, whispering about how uncultured she sounded and wondering how far in the countryside she must have come from. Others laughed, calling her an embarrassing country bumpkin for being so amazed by the palace. Hearing their comments, the director of the poorhouse tightened her grip on Ebi's hand and shot the passengers a sharp glare. Meanwhile, Ebi simply stared blankly at the people mocking her from across the aisle. The director gently told her that the palace truly was a wonderful place, one beautiful enough to stare at all day without growing tired of it. When Ebi asked if she really felt the same way, the director warmly agreed. Hearing those words immediately brightened Ebi's expression. Once again, she turned her gaze toward the palace. Not long after, the mocking passengers spoke again, saying that a country child like Ebi would probably never see the palace again, so she should take her time admiring it. Instead of getting angry, however, the director proudly thanked the man for his concern before announcing that Ebi would actually be living at the palace starting that very day. When she excitedly asked Ebi if it was true, the young girl nodded proudly. The passengers were stunned. One man refused to believe it, insisting they must have fallen victim to con artists pretending to recruit palace maids, but the director calmly corrected him. With unmistakable pride on her face, she declared that Ebi would be enrolling at the Imperial Academy beginning that day. The entire carriage fell silent in shock. Even nobles struggled to enter the prestigious gifted academy, so hearing that a poorhouse child had been accepted left everyone speechless. The director became even prouder, happily boasting about Ebi's achievement while the surrounding passengers stared at the girl in awe. Some even asked if she had some secret studying method. The director simply replied that she had always known Ebi was exceptionally smart. When the acceptance letter arrived, no one had been happier than the director herself. She confidently assured Ebi that she would become one of the brightest students at the academy. Hearing those words filled Ebi with gratitude, because without the director, she would have never even had the chance to apply. Years ago, the director had rescued her from what felt like a nightmare. At the time, the director had found her trembling inside an inn, while a red-haired woman harshly scolded and yelled at her. The woman complained that she never should have brought Ebi to the inn in the first place, calling her an ungrateful child. Terrified of being abandoned, Ebi begged the woman not to throw her away and promised to do whatever she was told. Unable to tolerate the scene any longer, the director stepped in and shouted at the woman for treating a child so cruelly. She then gently asked Ebi if she was all right before confronting the woman once again. The red-haired woman angrily demanded to know why the director was interfering when she was not the one raising the child. In response, the director asked if she could take Ebi with her instead. However, the woman coldly replied that Ebi would not come for free. When the director asked how much she wanted, the woman calculated the supposed cost of raising Ebi since infancy before demanding 10,000 gold in exchange for her. The enormous amount left the director stunned. Feeling guilty, Ebi awkwardly insisted that she was fine and that the director did not need to spend so much money on her. But instead of backing away, the director embraced her tightly and declared that she would gladly pay 10,000 gold for her. That moment overwhelmed Ebi with happiness. As the director held her close, she softly whispered that Ebi had already suffered far too much as a child. From that day onward, Ebi lived at the poorhouse under the director's care. Instead of paying tuition fees, she earned her education by helping with cleaning duties around the workhouse. One day, while heading outside, Ebi witnessed two children fighting over a potato because one of them was still hungry after finishing his own. Without hesitation, she gave them her potato, insisting that she was not hungry anyway. Deep down, she wanted to help ease the burden on the director, who struggled to care for so many children. It was around that time that Ebi discovered an imperial notice posted at schools across the nation. Among all the information written there, one line immediately caught her attention. students accepted into the gifted academy would receive free food, clothing, and shelter. To Ebi, that meant one less mouth for the director to feed. And once she graduated and found work, she could help the director even more. For the first time in her life, Ebi secretly prayed to her parents and wished with all her heart to pass the entrance exam. She rarely ever prayed to them, because even thinking about her parents made her throat tighten painfully. Part of her believed they had abandoned her simply because they did not need her anymore. Yet despite everything, a part of her still longed to meet them someday. Back in the present, the carriage finally arrived in front of the gifted academy. The grand entrance was crowded with parents and children, making the director feel slightly overwhelmed. Meanwhile, Ebi could barely contain her excitement. Soon, an announcer called for everyone's attention and informed them that students could now proceed inside. However, parents were strictly forbidden from entering the academy grounds, or the students would lose their admission entirely. At those words, many children burst into tears and clung tightly to their parents, frightened of being separated from them. Some openly cried, refusing to let go. The director and Ebi quietly watched the emotional scene unfold before them. The director soon glanced worriedly at Ebi, only to realize that the young girl looked nothing like the crying children around her. Instead, Ebi remained calm and composed as she politely thanked the director for bringing her all the way to the academy. Seeing that only made the director's heart ache even more. Unlike everyone else, Ebi did not cry or complain, despite probably being one of the youngest children there. Ebi gently reassured the director not to worry and promised that she would study hard, eat properly, and do her best at the academy. Meanwhile, the director quietly wiped away her tears, embarrassed that she was crying while Ebi remained strong. Noticing this, Ebi looked up at her in concern. The director immediately pulled her into one last hug and told her that if anything difficult ever happened, she should contact her right away. Even if they were apart, everyone at the poorhouse would always be thinking of her. Soon, the academy gates began to close, signaling the end of the farewells as students were ordered to finish their preparations. After exchanging their final goodbye, Ebi slowly walked toward the academy gates. As she disappeared inside, the director silently prayed that Ebi would thrive within the academy, and someday grow into a child who finally felt safe enough to cry. From high above the academy grounds, a man quietly observed the children entering through the gates below. Beside him, a woman watched the scene through the window with a blush creeping onto her face as the reality finally sank in. The academy had truly reopened. The elderly minister of state agreed, commenting that the academy would surely become lively again now that students had returned. However, his attention was soon drawn toward a small figure among the crowd. Excitedly walking among the other children was a tiny girl who looked far younger than everyone else. The minister quickly realized that the child had to be Ebi Elden, the only 7-year-old applicant accepted into the academy that year. Earlier to that day, a meeting was held inside the academy's grand meeting hall. The selection committee carefully reviewed the applications of children hoping to enter the prestigious institution. The atmosphere soon grew tense as several officials openly voiced their objections toward one particular applicant. They argued that the girl's background was completely unsuitable for the academy and insisted that she lacked the qualifications to stand among noble children. At the same time, another committee member loudly defended a different applicant, claiming that the child's family had made tremendous contributions during the war. Hearing the endless arguments, the minister quietly sighed to himself. After all, this was the Imperial Gifted Academy they were discussing. The academy had once been known throughout the Empire as a place dedicated to nurturing exceptionally talented children. However, 7 years earlier, it had been forced to close due to the chaos of the Imperial Succession War.
Yet the truth behind the Academy's long closure was far more personal. The real reason was the late Princess Ebi. During the Succession War, both the Empress and her newborn daughter had tragically been murdered, leaving behind only the princess's name. His Majesty had deeply mourned the daughter whose face he never even had the chance to see. Because of this, people gradually noticed that the Emperor would often stare blankly whenever he saw young children. Ambitious nobles soon began believing that if their child could catch the emperor's attention at the academy, they might gain favor from the imperial palace. As a result, countless noble families rushed to enroll their children. One official suddenly noticed an application among the documents. With visible disgust, he crumpled the paper and tossed it aside. At that moment, a man dressed in an elegant military uniform turned his sharp gaze toward him. The emperor had noticed everything. Coldly, he ordered the minister of state to retrieve the discarded application. The minister immediately obeyed before handing the paper back to His Majesty and quietly questioning why an applicant's file had been thrown away. The official who discarded it immediately grew nervous and hurriedly defended himself, explaining that it belonged to a child who lacked the necessary qualifications. However, the emperor calmly replied that he saw nothing particularly lacking about the application. The man quickly argued that the child came from a workhouse. In his panic, he accidentally revealed his true thoughts, saying that since the gifted academy had reopened to select His Majesty's future adopted child, there was no way a workhouse orphan should be admitted. The moment the words "adopted child" left his mouth, the emperor slowly repeated the phrase, causing the official to flinch in fear. His icy blue eyes narrowed as a cold and intimidating aura filled the room. He then demanded to know who had ever said he intended to choose an adopted child from the academy. The emperor firmly reminded the board that the Imperial Gifted Academy had been established to discover and nurture talented children. Yet now, the very people managing it were creating regulations that contradicted its purpose by rejecting qualified applicants based solely on social status. Afterward, he lowered his gaze toward the application in his hands. The 7-year-old applicant had achieved perfect scores in every subject on the upper-level school graduation exam. The revelation left the board directors completely stunned. Even the Minister of State looked shocked. Upper-level schools were typically attended by students around 15 years old. Yet somehow a 7-year-old child had passed every subject flawlessly. Despite this, some board members still hesitated to accept a child from a workhouse. To them, the academy's reopening had become little more than a noble social gathering. Before the war, the academy had accepted nearly 2,000 students annually. However, during its first reopening year, only 500 spots were available. Since every seat was considered precious, they argued that there was no reason to waste one on a workhouse child. Meanwhile, the emperor continued silently reading the application. When he reached the section asking about the child's hobbies, he paused briefly after seeing the word cleaning. Then, without hesitation, he placed the application on the table and approved it. The board members were left speechless. Some immediately protested in disapproval, but the emperor simply stood and prepared to leave. As he walked out, he instructed the Minister of State to personally oversee the child's admission process and ensure that no student would ever be rejected because of their social status. When the minister returned to the meeting hall, the board members immediately surrounded him with questions, desperately asking whether His Majesty had mentioned adopting a child. The minister calmly explained that the emperor had only ordered them to manage the academy fairly. In fact, he had not even asked for the child's name. Hearing this finally eased the board's worries. Curious, the minister glanced down at the approved application form once more. The name written there was Ebi Elden.
Back in the present, Ebi cheerfully greeted a woman named Melody, who had been assigned to guide her to the dormitory. Excited beyond measure, Ebi eagerly shook Melody's hand while tiptoeing from excitement. As they walked through the academy grounds, Melody asked whether the journey had been difficult since she had seen in Ebi's documents that she came from Elam, a region far from the imperial palace. However, Ebi immediately shook her head and happily explained that she had enjoyed the trip because it was her first time visiting the capital. Her adorable reaction was so overwhelming that Melody instinctively clutched her chest, feeling as though her heart might burst from how cute the child was. Soon afterward, Melody handed Ebi the Academy guidebook, explaining that it also contained a detailed map of the enormous campus since there were countless buildings and classrooms throughout the Academy. Ebi immediately began reading the guidebook with complete focus, causing Melody to smile warmly. Since the guidebook contained so much information, Melody assured her that she could take her time reading it. Yet the moment Ebi closed the book, she calmly announced that she had already memorized everything inside. Melody froze in disbelief and asked if she truly meant it. When Ivy confidently nodded, Melody was once again stunned by the child's incredible talent. As Ivy attempted to return the guidebook, Melody explained that every student received one to keep. Hearing that made Ivy even happier because it was the very first book she had ever owned. Melody giggled at her reaction and told her there was no need to get so excited over a single book since she would receive many more in the future. That statement immediately reminded Ivy of the notice she had once read. The academy would provide food, clothing, and shelter to every student during their stay. Her excitement only grew stronger once they arrived at the dormitory. The room waiting for her was beautiful, complete with a large bed, a spacious desk, and a window overlooking the garden outside. Melody explained that another student would soon move into the room across from hers, so she hoped the two girls would get along well. Afterward, Melody carefully explained everything Ivy needed to know about dormitory life. A short while later, dinner time arrived. Remembering Melody's directions earlier, Ivy eagerly headed toward the dining hall. Everything she had seen so far had amazed her, so she could only imagine how delicious the academy food would be as well. However, the moment she entered the dining hall, a noble boy immediately noticed her. The sight of a commoner-looking child irritated him. In his mind, if someone like Ivy had not been accepted into the academy, his own younger brother could have enrolled alongside him instead. Unable to accept the situation, he decided he would personally make Ivy realize that she did not belong there. As the boy approached her, he suddenly shoved her without warning. Caught completely off guard, Ivy lost her balance. Just as she was about to hit the floor, she tightly shut her eyes in fear. But strangely, it did not hurt. Slowly opening her eyes, she realized the noble boy had somehow fallen onto the floor instead. Then standing directly in front of her was a boy who had caught her before she could fall. The sudden closeness left Ivy completely stunned. Her face instantly turned red as she stared speechlessly at the boy holding her in his arms, unable to move at all. The blue-eyed boy who had caught Ivy gently asked if she was all right. Only then did Ivy finally return to her senses, though she still found herself mesmerized by his crystal-clear blue eyes. They reminded her of the precious jewels she had only seen illustrated in books, so beautiful that it felt as though someone could lose themselves within them. At that moment, the red-haired boy approached them and asked if she was truly okay. Hearing his voice finally snapped, Ivy completely back to reality. Feeling embarrassed, she awkwardly explained that she was fine and apologized for causing trouble to people she had only just met. Meanwhile, the boy who had shoved Ivy earlier suddenly exploded in anger, shouting that they clearly had no idea who he was if they dared to push him like that. However, before he could continue, he overheard whispers spreading among the surrounding students. Curious, he turned toward the crowd and noticed several girls excitedly complimenting the two boys for their handsome appearances. From their reactions and conversations, he quickly realized who they were. The two boys belonged to the famous Marquis Ladschelv and Duke Kalin families. The moment he understood their identities, his expression instantly turned pale. Without wasting another second, he hurriedly ran away as fast as he could to escape the situation. After the troublemaker disappeared, the black-haired boy turned his attention back toward Ivy and calmly assured her that if the boy ever bothered her again, she should immediately report it to a professor. But the moment he finished speaking, several girls suddenly swarmed around him. Many eagerly greeted him, while others excitedly invited him to eat together with them. Because Ivy was the smallest student at the academy, she was quickly pushed aside by the growing crowd of girls surrounding the two boys. Before she realized it, she'd already been shoved far away from them. Seeing this made Ivy feel slightly sad, since she had not even managed to properly thank them. To her, the two boys must have been incredibly important people if they attracted so much attention everywhere they went. Deciding not to disturb them any further, Ebi quietly slipped away from the crowd. Meanwhile, the black-haired boy watched her leave with curiosity. He had not expected her to look even younger up close. since he had already heard rumors that Ebi had received perfect scores on the graduation exam. Just like him, he found himself wanting to speak with her more. After all, she was also the youngest student ever accepted into the academy. Eventually, the two boys finally managed to find seats in the cafeteria. The red-haired boy immediately sighed in relief, happy that they could finally eat in peace. However, even after sitting down, younger students continued approaching them and asking to join their table. Arcel bluntly rejected them, saying he simply wanted to eat quietly. The disappointed students could only apologize before reluctantly leaving. Watching this happen again, the red-haired boy asked if it would really hurt Arcel to be a little kinder. Arcel calmly replied that the students only kept approaching because Luska always entertained them anyway. If Luska disliked it so much, then he should handle it himself instead. Just as Arcel was about to continue eating, he suddenly noticed Ebi in the distance wandering around with her tray, searching for an empty seat. His eyes unconsciously followed her movements until the two accidentally made eye contact. The moment Ebi noticed them, she immediately brightened and walked toward their table. She cheerfully explained that she still had not properly thanked them earlier and politely asked if it would be all right for her to sit with them. Luska was about to agree immediately, but before he could answer, Arcel suddenly cut him off. He explained that Luska had wanted to eat quietly and suggested that perhaps they could share a meal another time if another opportunity came. Luska instantly fell silent in disbelief. Completely unaware of his friend's frustration, Arcel smiled proudly as if he had done Luska a favor by politely declining for him. Finally losing patience, Luska abruptly stood from his chair and muttered that Arcel truly was hopeless. Completely confused, Arcel called after him while Luska walked away in annoyance. Meanwhile, Ebi simply chose a sandwich for her meal before deciding to eat outside instead. She quietly concluded that from tomorrow onward, she would either come very early or very late to avoid the crowded dining hall altogether. As she wandered outside searching for a place to eat, she suddenly remembered spotting a beautiful garden from her dormitory window earlier. Thinking it would be the perfect place to relax, she decided to head there instead. However, while walking through the area, a faint but pleasant fragrance suddenly caught her attention. The scent seemed to drift from behind a thick bush that strangely resembled a hidden tunnel. Looking down at the academy map, Ebi realized that beyond the forest lay the imperial palace itself. If even the palace gardens extended this far, then she imagined the scenery inside must be breathtakingly beautiful. After glancing up at the sky, she noticed there was still plenty of time before dinner hours ended, meaning she could safely return before curfew. Unable to resist her curiosity, Ebi decided to take just a quick look inside. She carefully crawled through the narrow opening hidden beneath the bushes. It took quite a while before she finally managed to crawl out from the thick, overgrown grass on the other side. Breathing deeply in relief after escaping the cramped passage, Ebi slowly lifted her head, only for her eyes to widen in shock. What stood before her was not a garden at all. It was a graveyard. A large grave and a smaller one rested quietly side by side in the clearing. Confused, Ebi recalled that the Academy guidebook had never once mentioned graves hidden within the forest. Still, she soon realized that the pleasant fragrance she had smelled earlier came from the flowers surrounding the graves. Feeling uneasy, Ebi decided she should leave immediately before she accidentally caused trouble by staying there too long. However, just as she turned to leave, she noticed how neglected the graves had become. Fallen leaves and dirt covered the area, as though no one had cleaned it for a very long time. Without even thinking about it, Ebi instinctively began cleaning the graves. The habit she had developed while doing cleaning duties during her upper-level school days naturally took over. Before long, the graves looked spotless and polished, almost as if they had become brand new again. As she prepared to finally head back, Ebi suddenly noticed something behind the graves. A little later, footsteps quietly echoed through the graveyard. Someone had arrived. The person immediately noticed that something looked different. Fresh flowers had been carefully arranged around the graves, and the entire area appeared newly cleaned. Sensing something unusual, the figure quickly walked behind the graves, only to stop upon seeing the small figure of a sleeping child. There, resting peacefully beside the graves with a flower crown still in her hands, was Ebi.